Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amy Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Zwallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries.
Hello, everyone. Today we are delving into using symbolic frameworks like tarot cards and astrology as guides for creative work. And we're specifically going to be talking about the sign Capricorn and the tarot card, the Hanged Man. And in our last episode, we talked about our New Year visioning process, which included picking a card for each month of the year. And we did this to base our monthly theme on. And we thought it would be fun to explore the zodiac signs along with the card that we chose. And as we'll see, this is a very interesting combination with these two energies of Capricorn and the Hanged Man, because they're basically opposite in many ways. So we'll be covering the full spectrum today, and it should be a fun little conversation in duality.
Yes. And I think, too, astrology is coming so much more into the zeitgeist. I mean, it's always been around, but there's a resurgence. You know, people are interested in this. And I know, as a person who likes to research, I'm always like, where did this even come from? You know, like what, why? So I'm a Capricorn. So what? What does that mean? How is it that all these people born in January can be the same? Well, we're not going to go super deep into natal charts, but the idea is that the minute that we're born, the planets are all a certain way, and that is supposed to be reflective. It's a blueprint for you to understand your personality, to understand your life's purpose and your mission. And then we're also very affected by different planetary cycles. And so you'll see stuff about that. So today we wanted to just start with Capricorn season. We're going to do this every month with the new sign of the zodiac so that you guys can get familiar with the basic tenets of these ideas. And because as Amy mentioned, we wanted to do these tarot cards, and we thought that this would be a great way to conjure creativity.
And just to mention, we are going to be focusing on the symbolic aspect of these systems. We're going to be using Western astrology because there's also the Chinese zodiac, there's like Vedic astrology, and we can discuss those another time. But we're not going to be focusing so much on the literal astronomical placement of things. So
yes. What I've noticed throughout my shamanic training and just this being in touch with what a lot of traditions call the collective. It's kind of a new agey term also, but so that there's something going on collectively. And if you notice, as you start to look around, you know, there's a general vibe of the season. We talked about this in our winter solstice episode. And so we want to talk all about Capricorn.
yes.
So we're using tarot and astrological signs, like Amy says, archetypes for creativity. I read this article in Allure magazine by Eliza Kelly, and she was talking about the rise of the occult. And she was saying that right now people are more interested in the mystical realm than ever. And it's become clear, and I'm quoting her, to me, that astrology provides comfort in a world that's chaotic. And right now it's a comfort that's sorely needed. And she kind of gave a quick overview of why this interest in the occult has always corresponded with times of political unrest, that there was another resurgence of the New Age with the civil rights movement and the Kennedy assassination in the 60s.
Interesting.
And then even back before with the spiritualists kind of during Abraham Lincoln's time, which is the Civil War in the US. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it is that there are these tools within these quote unquote, and she uses the occult loosely, and she includes tarot cards and palmistry and several other things in that, but kind of the neo-pagan stuff that we're seeing. And yeah, so she just brings up that it's a way for people to kind of take their internal power back. And then when you look at religion or these other kind of what we'll call quote unquote patriarchal structures, which is kind of like a defer to the authority in the room, defer to the person who we have said has the answers, mm-hmm. that that's when it's waned, that there are different power structures at play.
That makes sense, that people, when they feel powerless because they don't trust leaders, they don't trust the systems in place, they are going to turn inward and try to figure out, how do I access information and direction for myself?
Yes. So before we go right into Capricorn, I wanted to talk about the lunar events for January. And granted, we are recording this on January 7th. So we just had on January 6th, there was a partial solar eclipse, which was only visible from Northeast Asia and the North Pacific. But yeah, so this just happened 2 nights ago. I know that I was up until 5 a.m. with insomnia, which is just, I don't know. I'm dying to know if our listeners have the same thing. But I find that in the last couple of years, I'm like, why can't I sleep? Why can't I sleep? And then I'll find out, oh yeah, now I'm paying closer attention, that it's like, sometimes I wonder if it's like chicken or the egg. Like, am I staying up late? Like, because I know there's an eclipse coming and I'm saying it, or is this actually affecting me?
It would be an interesting poll to take.
Gosh, I know, right? So part of it was we were on vacation in the city for my birthday. So it could be just being in a hotel, but the night before I slept great. So did the eclipse do anything for you?
We just barely moved. So it's been like a crazy upheaval weekend of trying to move in and figure out our new setting back up here in Washington. So I think that's probably, it was kind of upheaval energy, allegedly, right? Is what they were saying about this solar eclipse.
Yes. I felt like I was just stuck. Like I noticed the few days before because it was the new year, I was like, okay, I'm going to dive into my creativity. I'm doing all my things that I normally do that kind of awakens my creativity. And like, I get to work and I felt like completely paralyzed and overwhelmed. And like, really, I was really wrestling with my internal demons, I would say. And, but I feel like something definitely shifted. I mean, I just feel like, I don't know if it was just that I went on a weekend with my husband and I was away from my kids, and it was like we were doing adult things like going to museums and eating at nice restaurants and not worrying about, shushing children. So
yeah,
I don't know. It could have been both. Maybe it was the eclipse. Maybe it was that. Anyway, on January 21st, there is a super blood wolf moon eclipse, which is the first time it's going to happen in 3 years. And the US will be able to experience a total lunar eclipse. The moon will be at its closest point to the Earth, appearing bigger and a lot brighter, which is why it's called a supermoon. And the total lunar eclipses are often called blood moons because when the sun and the Earth and moon align, I never knew this, Amy, this was interesting to me, that the sunlight that passes through the Earth's atmosphere will be able to turn the moon red. Cool. And the lunar eclipses can only appear during a full moon. And because it's January, the January moon is called the wolf moon. So they're calling it the super blood wolf moon.
Sounds super mystical.
Doesn't it?
That's exciting.
It really does. Let's talk about the astrology of Capricorn. Due to the precession of the equinoxes, which we've discussed this on other Living in Alignment with the Seasons episodes, if you look through our history. But the December solstice no longer takes place while the sun is in the constellation Capricornus, as it did up until 130 BCE. Like you said, the Capricorn showed up originally, or was named or recognized in writing through the Sumerians. And for all we know, it was long before that, but that's what we have in terms of ancient history. So it was a sign called Capricorn, and it began with the solstice. The solstice now takes place when the sun is in Sagittarius. And the sun's most southerly position, which is attained at the northern hemisphere's winter solstice, is now called the Tropic of Capricorn, a term which also applies to the line on the Earth at which the sun is directly overhead at noon on that solstice. So the sun is now in Capricorn from late January through mid-February.
Yeah, and the mythological association of this sign, it is a sea goat. The constellation is shaped like a sea goat, and it's associated with this ancient Sumerian god called Ea or Enki. I've heard both, depending on what group.
And it's spelled E-A or E-N-K-I. So
this is a goat with a fish. The bottom half is a fish. The top half is a goat, which is really interesting because Capricorn is a symbol that is associated with an earth element, but it also has this water business going on. And the god of water is like where it's coming from. And originally this god lived in the ocean and then came out every day to watch over the land and then return to the sea at night. And also the Capricorn constellation is near to all of the water constellations. And so this kind of like water earth theme can kind of be seen as a metaphor for the human experience, where we live in this material earthy world, But then we have part of us in this emotional, symbolic, mythic realm. And then Capricorn is also associated with the god Pan and also the god and the planet Saturn.
Yes, I think it's important to note Pan is one of the Greek gods, and he's half man, half goat.
Mm-hmm.
And he has the horns. And so he's often depicted as kind of a devil figure. It's his likeness that spurred on a lot of the Christian depictions of Satan as the horned god.
Right, because Capricorn is also, it's associated with the devil card. And I think the devil card, it depicts Pan originally in
That's
many
right.
decks.
And just for people I think that can be very scary for people if they're not familiar with the tarot. And so just so people are aware that the devil card is one that is the card of it shows duality. It shows it's one that is very much associated with like addiction or being kind of a slave to a certain way of life that may not be in alignment with your highest and greatest. So again, using this idea of this as Pan, right? That the Capricorn kind of encompasses the duality, like you said, Aimee, of this like water, earth, all of these qualities that represent our human experience. It's also been associated with ambitious, goal-oriented, dedicated, and hardworking people. Often leadership is common among Capricorn traits. And what I like so much about what helps me to remember what Capricorn's all about too is that because it is the goat or has these goat-like traits, this is the kind of energy where you just go the most direct way up the mountain. It's not meandering. It's not looking at the sun and noticing the trees. It's oh, there's a goal and I'm going straight up the quickest, fastest way to get to it. That is very much a Capricorn energy. They're kind of the taskmaster and they are all about getting in alignment with this energy of the season, at least right now, is all about getting in alignment with your right work. You know, what is it that you're doing that keeps you in alignment with like the right work that you want to do in the world?
I really love and respect the energy of Capricorn and these qualities that have come to be associated with it, because it is so efficient and action oriented, which is you have to have receptivity and mental exploration at times, but to actually like get anything done in life, you have to be able to summon this action, ambition, goal oriented energy. So
I agree. To that end, because I'm familiar with this type of stuff, because it rules me, and I feel like I've had to make an extra effort to be the more receptive, more, you know, I've had to make a lot of conscious effort in my life to slow the heck down and not be so focused on the results. This is kind of the duality of Capricorn. There's always like, this is what's great about it, and this is the other part that it can bring up. So Capricorn's also ruled by the energy field of Saturn, and Saturn is all about power, and it's kind of it's that builder, and it's all about getting you in line with your right work, and it's heavy energy, but it can be heavy in a good way. You know, it can force us to really connect to, you know, our life's work in a way that is strong and powerful and forceful. It can also, the negative connotation can be that that dark forces are connected with power. And that the density can also bring about, you know, kind of this darkness of the dark side of humanity, the bad side of the business world, right? On the one hand, in business, you have all this abundance and you have commerce and you have an economy and you have jobs creating and all of this stuff. And then on the flip side, there's greed and competition and revenge and it can be a hard thing. Yes. And so a lot of time, there's also something that's called a Saturn return that happens to everyone. And the Saturn return is when the planet Saturn comes back to meet your natal Saturn. Like I mentioned earlier in the episode, when you're born and all the planets are somewhere in the sky, it takes about 29 and a half years for Saturn to make it all the way around the solar system and back to where it was when you were born. And oftentimes when you're 29 and a half, you know, it starts, you can say about 3 year span between 28 and into your early 30s, that there's usually a big kind of implosion, you know, explosion in your life in terms of oh my gosh, who am I? What am I doing? It's big identity. It's kind of hold on to your horses. This is coming. And then it also can happen again 29 and a half years later. So in your late 50s, the same type of thing can happen, and it brings about this reckoning. And I think it's something that you can really look forward to, because what happens with Saturn returns is, I think you get really clear about, you usually move up to a new trajectory in life sometimes.
Right.
Maybe it's spiritual, maybe you get a divorce and you're married to someone else. Maybe you're doing something totally different in your life. So that is what happens. And so when we think about this Capricorn energy, I wanted to mention the Saturn return because it coincides with that.
Yeah. Having just gone through that myself a couple years ago, it was a wild ride for sure. I can remember like a certain shift in my brain where for the first time I felt like, oh, I'm different than I was. Like my inner workings inside my brain have shifted from what they were before. And that was, we sold all our stuff and moved to Mexico and had this whole time of transition and traveling, and we started the podcast. So that was kind of, if you are thinking about making major, huge transitions in your life around this time, you could blame it on Saturn.
Well, and interestingly enough, I was trying to reflect back on my Saturn return, and I was thinking what happened when I was 29 and a half, I had my first child. And so it was interesting because in the 3-year span, it was a really huge awakening to my maternal. It was the first time where I wasn't ambitious, like where I remember thinking after I had my first son, like, am I capable of doing anything anymore? Like it was almost like a complete, it was very humbling to have a baby and be like, how am I supposed to function in the world? I felt like I didn't know how to do anything. And it was something that I really had to dive into, just rocking that baby, nursing that baby. But then by the time number 2 came along, we were like starting our business. So by the end of my Saturn return, we went right into building a company. And so it was a really interesting time of flux when I look back on my own, but yes. So it can be hard to sometimes stay optimistic. So don't be afraid to take the leaps. And it's a really powerful energy field. So don't be afraid to reclaim your energy.
Yeah, we'll talk in the end. We want to share some practices for kind of engaging with this energy and exploring like what your relationship is to these qualities like power. But first, is there anything else you want to say about Capricorn before we move on to our Hanged Man discussion?
No, I don't think so. I think we move right into the Hanged Man, and I wanted to start this one off talking about how we got to this point and all of that. So do you want to talk about that, Amy? So
the Hanged Man, like we said in the beginning, this is the card that we drew for this month to base our theme around. And what this card looks like is a man is hanging upside down by one ankle, and the other ankle is kind of in a 4 shape. I might not be explaining this very well.
Yes, it's like a figure 4.
Yeah, a figure 4. There's like flowers growing. I mean, this is from traditional imagery of this. I have another deck that I really enjoy, and the Hanged Man is this man floating in water with piranhas surrounding him. So it's a little different, but he's also upside down. And so it sounds ominous, but it's really a really great card. I know you have a really cool book about the symbology of this. Can you share that?
Yes. Okay. So I bought this book maybe a year or so ago, and it's really great. If you come from a Christian background and you're interested in this, I highly recommend this book. It's kind of heavy, but it's really good. It's called Meditations on the Tarot: A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. And it's by an anonymous author. It was printed in the 80s. And it's like a scholarly read. And they talk a lot about, they use a lot of Bible references. And so if you have a background in that and that interests you, this is really, it's a great tool, a great companion. So in the book Meditations on a Tarot, the author references the fall of Adam and Eve, leaving the garden, and puts it into the context of a spiritual gravitational system. And so as movement between one gravitational field to another. So not in terms of shame or sin, which is how, for those of you familiar with the Adam and Eve story, it's that Eve, she's tempted by the serpent. She gets the apple. She gives it to Adam. he eats, and then she bites the apple, so she gives it to him and says, eat it. And he goes, well, the woman gave it to me, so I ate. And then it was Eve's fault for getting him out of the garden. And now they're in this fallen state because of the woman. And anyway, I never loved the story. But, but so instead of in terms of shame and sin and who's at fault and who's to blame, rather than different states of matter, and granted, I'm sure there's many people that have a different read on the Adam and Eve story. That was always just the way I was like, So the hangman represents the condition of one in life whom gravitation from above has replaced that from below. And that's a quote from the book. And they use the symbolism of martyrdom as the man is upside down, like St. Peter, or as the story of Odin, that through death has now achieved a new state. And so it's a card of upheaval because you are, like you said, it can look ominous, and it's almost like that this person is being, somewhat tortured.
Right.
And so it's not always the easiest transition, but that when we submit to what is inevitable, if there's, a change is coming and we don't resist it, we just go, oh, here it is. Here's the change. I'm just going to move. I'm going to choose into the change. Then through this state, then you are aligned with a higher vibration. You go to a different gravitational reality. And so in the book, they call it the attraction of heaven, that the attraction of heaven is so real that it can take hold of not only the soul, but also the physical body. And then the body is carried up and no longer touches the ground. And so it's the idea that sudden death is welcome because you feel literally called by heaven. Or if we're talking figurative death, which, I've seen in my own life, you've seen in your life as something that goes hand in hand with belief systems and awareness, then it's walking into the instability of a new situation because your higher self is calling you there.
Right. That's really cool. Yeah, that idea of surrender is really illustrated well in some of these cards, because in the original Wait Rider deck, this guy's face is really serene. Like, he is not grimacing in pain or anything. So it is to illustrate this attitude of surrender, of letting go, of non-attachment. The deck that I have is called Prisma Visions, and the description on this card talks about forsaking action for insight. So this is like the card of where you are just to hang there and see things from your new upside down perspective versus pushing through things, which, like we mentioned, is opposite of like goats. Goats push up the mountain, but this is the card that calls you to be still and observe things differently, shift your reality, shift your focus.
And I wonder too, if when you think about the goat going up the hill, they're single-minded. And so there's some sort of metaphor in that too. The idea that when you're just putting one foot in front of the other, you can kind of meditatively reach for the insight whilst being in the midst of the action, and I wonder if there's some sort of marriage between the two sentiments, that it doesn't have to mean exhaustive mental push and force, that it's more about putting one foot in front of the other and then submitting and moving allowing like the river to flow in front of you and just moving with the current.
Right. That's the task of life. We can't all sit by ourselves in a cave and not do any. I mean, we could, but most of us don't. So like being able to cultivate this attitude of surrender and letting go. Because I mean, when I think about surrender, I think of it more in terms of surrendering to reality as it actually is versus entertaining your constant weird illusions about how you think things should be. Like letting that go, letting go of the illusion that you are in control, of that you have this need to control. So it's more, so yes, like back to your point, we can hike up the mountain and be in our lives and still maintain this attitude. Like that is the task of mindfulness. And that's where I think all the Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Taoism, they talk about this idea of non-attachment so beautifully. Have you read the Tao Te Ching, the
I haven't.
Lao Tzu. So I was looking, my brother just gave it to me for Christmas and I really liked it. But there's a rendition that was written by Ursula Le Guin. And I love one of the parts that she said in it. I'm just going to quote her real quick. She said, "So the unwanting soul sees what's hidden, and the ever wanting soul sees only what it wants." So this is like letting go of your ideas about how things are and observing what actually is from this place of surrender and openness, instead of like having this attitude of lack and desire. This is the only way to like truly see what's before you. Otherwise, you're so focused on these attachments and these desires that you can't really see. Yeah, I thought that was such a beautiful way to put that concept.
I love that. I love that idea that that the ever wanting soul only sees what it wants. Yep. Then that you can see the cycle just even in the words. It's like you can just picture this like circular, hamster wheel of like being stuck on a track that you can't get off of when you're just of want and desire and pushing.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about how this type of idea is going to color the stories that we tell this month. And granted, we only have 3 more weeks left.
We do. We took a week off for the new year.
And so next week we have an interview with Audrey O'Brien, who is going to talk about her story of how radical minimalism, living in a bus with her family in a remote mountain town, and discovering how to breathe through Kundalini yoga practices healed her body and her marriage while simultaneously changing how she approached parenting and viewed family. And so it's interesting because we have her, and I interviewed her back in early December before Christmas, before we had even pulled any of these I'm calling them our creativity cards.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was really interesting that I felt like her story lined up with exactly what we're talking about here, with the energy that we're talking about here. And so we'll be hearing from her next week, which is great. Yeah. I wanted to also mention the story that happened to me when I went, it was right before Christmas, when I went to go pick up my mom from the airport, and I went over to this museum in San Francisco called the Legion of Honor, which is amazing. I actually went back again this weekend because I was so blown away by it. Yeah, so it was the day after the winter solstice, and there was full moon energy, and it was like this newness of a cycle, and I was trying to go and be inspired. I was like really looking to connect with beautiful artwork and just kind of see what got my brain moving. So I pulled up to this San Francisco Bay, this beautiful museums on this hill above the Presidio, and you can see the Golden Gate Bridge, and you can see the Pacific Ocean, and you can see the whole city of San Francisco behind you, and there's cypress trees everywhere, and the building itself is like this gorgeous Roman-inspired building. It feels like you're in the middle of Europe, but with this modern city behind you. So it's just gorgeous. I walked up there. It was the first time I'd been away in a long time alone, and I loved that. And I had been listening to this book that I highly recommend for everyone to listen to called Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World. And I was kind of just stuck in my mind of like, how are we going to make it better? Like, how do we make the world a better place? How do we do this? How do I get comfortable with my white privilege? How do I, stop adding to the systemic problems? How do I be a better person? What is my role as a female leader? What is my role as a mother? What is, just all these things, right? So I kind of went there wanting to connect with the artistic master's energy. And so I'm walking through the place, and the first thing I see is this 2,000-year-old sculpture of this Roman woman who looks like a ballroom dancer. And she's standing, like her pose is literally an international standard dance pose. It's over 2,000 years old. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so connected to the universe right now. The universe, like here, it's like, this is sitting right here just for me to see. And then there were these beautiful Maharaji jewels and all the emeralds and rubies. And I just thought the crystals the stones were so magical and amazing. And then I go up, and there's, 70 Rodins in this museum. It's this huge Rodin sculpture exhibit. And Rodin is just so glorious at evoking all this emotion through the movement of his sculptures. And you're just really aware of the kind of the plight of humanity and the pain and the suffering and the oppression. And as I've gone through the whole thing, and as I'm getting ready to leave, I'm walking out to the car, and I see this kind of concrete wall. And I thought, oh, I bet that's a lookout point. And if I go over there, I'm going to see some really amazing view of the ocean, and I just wanted to go take a look at the ocean because I don't get to see it that often. And so I walk over there and I'm just feeling so full, and I'm feeling so like I got what I needed. And I look out over this wall, and what I see is a barbed wire fence and a life-size plaster statue of a Jewish man looking out through the barbed wire with 15 plus plaster bodies behind him, and, you know, looking like they're dead. And it was such a sharp juxtaposition of the incredible abundance and the beauty of the area. And then having it was a Holocaust memorial, obviously, and seeing the atrocities of kind of what we're capable of as humans mixed in with the beauty. I mean, it was a very harrowing, you know, something that I won't forget probably ever in my life. It was one that I wasn't expecting it. And so it was surprising. And it felt like, you know, we had just done all of this visioning and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is what it kind of feels like, this energy of the hanged man, of what is next, of what we're dealing with next as a society, and what where we are trying to move forward while not forgetting, like being aware of what we're capable of, both on the extreme abundance and beauty, but also this, you know, kind of the ugliest, most horrific things that humanity is capable of, that it's all kind of right there. And it's all mixed together. And I don't know what the answers are. I just felt like the experience itself was one that it prompted like 50 more questions. And it made me think, you know, for what we're doing with our podcast, and what I assume with the listeners and the comments that we get from our listeners, that they're all people that are thinking like this, that are wanting to figure out, you know, how do we not only make our own lives better, but how do we help other people? How do we challenge ourselves? How do we get beyond our comfort zones? Because it's very easy, I think, especially as a white privileged woman of, you know, relative means, you know, it's so easy just to kind of put my head in the sand and not pay attention to what's really going on out there. So
yeah, that's an amazing illustration of the whole hanged man idea, because the gift, I think, of this concept in this card is insight. Like, that's what you're after. And you, put yourself in this position to get inspiration, to get insight. But then you also, like, it wasn't in the way you were expecting. You were like thrown off and surprised by it. And it generated all these new questions, which is what you have to continuously do if you want to continuously evolve in your thinking and in your beliefs and all of that. So I think that's a great illustration.
Yeah, I find, thank you for that. Thank you for that, that reflection on that experience, because I feel like I'm still somewhat processing it. And I think there's something to me that I've been thinking a lot about, this idea, this general distrust that I have of people who claim to have all the answers. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just think, shouldn't we be just continually asking the questions? And this idea too, that the way that we get answers, it's like, we're not going to know what to do. Like, it's just, you keep showing up and you keep asking, and you keep it's like you inching along. It's one step at a time. It's like, sometimes we're lucky enough to get the blueprint and kind of see the skeleton forming of whatever it is that we're trying to create, of whatever it is that we're trying to do. And this is really also very Capricornian energy, right? It's that earthy, it's the bare bones, it's the structure of what's happening. And that oftentimes we have to just have that faith and that trust that if we keep putting our heart in the right position, that there will be uncomfortable realizations, not only about our life circumstances, but internal things that we recognize about ourselves, things that we may be like, this is not cool. And how do I change this? There's a cost to what's going on in my life.
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Taking ownership of how you are contributing to your situation and your environment. And that's all you can change. You know, that's all you can do anything about. Right. So.
Right. So let's talk about our challenges this week, Amy.
Yeah.
You had some really good ones.
Yeah, some practices for kind of cultivating this surrender attitude. One that I love to do because I like to do yoga is just shavasana, the corpse pose at the end. If you really take the opportunity to try to let go, release every little muscle, release all the little thoughts out of your brain during this time, like that is the function of this pose. And they say, a lot of teachers will say that this is the most important pose in all of yoga. So yes, you can do yoga and have your whole yoga practice be shavasana. And there you go. You've done yoga for the day. So for those of you who are like, I don't want to do a whole yoga class before this pose, you don't have to.
I think that to that end, my birthday was a couple days ago, as I mentioned, and I asked my boys, they're 9 and 6. And I was like, all I want for my birthday from you guys is for you to come to yoga class with me. So I picked a slow flow class and they said, okay, we'll come. And my older son, like, they were tired after like 15 minutes, and it was an hour and 15-minute class. But I just told him, I said, you have to stay on your mat and you can just breathe. You can just lay there. And he did. He laid there the whole time. And at the end, I said, you did so well. And he was like, no, I didn't. I'm so bad at this. I can't believe I did it. He was kind of upset about it. And I was trying to explain to him, and I think he got it at the end, but he was like, I was like, yoga isn't about doing the best poses and getting all the way through everything the most perfectly. It's about just being there and showing up. And, and I think he was like, oh, okay. Like it registered. And I was so proud of him for just laying on his mat for 45 minutes. I was like, this is the best birthday present I could ask for, and I think he learned that he's capable of sitting still for a lot longer than he actually thought he was,
That's pretty amazing. That's ambitious.
Well, I know. I don't think they'll be coming back anytime soon because it wasn't, they like, it was all fine at the end, but they were like, Mom, this is so long, But I think, next time I'll take them to a kids yoga class. It's like 40 minutes. That'd probably be more for their attention span. But anyway. But I know a lot of adults that would say that an hour and 15 minutes is too long too. So It's great.
Yeah, the whole concept, the whole idea you mentioned with like the death, the martyrdom, like that's shavasana as the corpse, this is like your time to practice dying every time you do it. And like you can also look at your going to sleep at night like this, as far as like you let go, you release the day, and then you die and are reborn the next day. The other thing that people do that deals with this concept of surrender and letting go is orgasm. So the sexual experience, next time, examine it in a different way. Maybe like, I don't know. It's weird to say like, oh, think about surrendering while you're trying to surrender. Like it doesn't really make sense. Like, but maybe just
I get where you're going with it.
Reflect afterwards, reflect before, like what is this quality of surrender and letting go that is put into practice during the sexual experience. So another way to engage with this idea is just to clear out and declutter some area of your life, like a drawer, your purse, or some room. Like that's another really good letting go, non-attachment practice.
Yes. You wanted to talk too about practicing to explore ambition and determination. So we wanted to do some practice for getting in touch with Capricorn, which is, Amy had this idea of a meditation on the solar plexus. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So since Capricorn, the energy is very will focused, which has to do with your third chakra. This is your power center in your solar plexus. So like above your belly button, below your heart. If we just take a minute, like next time you sit to meditate or stand to do whatever, just put a hand and focus on your solar plexus and think about your relationship to power. Like what makes you feel powerful, and how do you use that power to direct energy toward your goals? And I think, like you said earlier, like as far as like the shadow side of Capricorn, power and ambition and determination, these are like neutral qualities, but the way people use them might not be. So we have to really get in touch with our relationship to power, as in, like, do we like it? Do we fear it? Do we feel it's often used against us? Do we feel ourselves manipulating others with it? Do we feel like we don't have any power? Like, I think it's really interesting to reflect on that and maybe use those questions as a journal prompt.
I love that, Aimee. I think contemplating your connection to power, because you're right. I think collectively we hold that up as, I think we are very ambitious at least in our Western American society, right? Mm-hmm. It's like ambition and determination are all words that people like to be described, but like for the most part, I think, right? Like, oh, they're so determined, like those are good things. But like you said, there's a lot of people that don't like that, or that feel threatened by it, or that feel, like you said, that they don't have any of that. And I think that's all interesting because, like you said, they really are neutral when you think about it. But we all have a story that we tell ourselves about who we are in relation to power, ambition, determination, whether we are, whether we aren't. And I think the idea is that we all have it in us somewhere. And so how are we relating to it? That is brilliant. The other thing I was thinking about doing, in just a simple practice, and I was doing this because as a nod to Audrey's interview next week, is 11-minute Kundalini meditations every morning. So I'm just going to start here. I decided not to do it in conjunction with any random day. Like, I just picked a day and decided, you know what, today I'm going to start 11-minute morning meditations for a month. So for 30 days, I'm going to go and try to do 11-minute morning meditations as a way to just connect in with where my ambitions are and what I'm trying to focus on. And then really just to let things go.
That's great. And those, like, starting your new little habits, no matter what they are, it could be as simple as sitting up and taking one deep breath in the morning. But when you decide, like, I'm going to do this thing, this builds your willpower and builds your trust in yourself that you can decide things and follow through on them. So I think that's a great 11-minute goal. But yeah, for those of you who are like, I don't want to do, that's too big of a commitment. That seems too big, do 1
3
minute
minutes or 1 minute
or one
right,
breath,
exactly.
And it could be with anything. Like, it's just as a way to build that willpower muscle.
But if you want to do 11 minutes with me, let me know.
I will try that with you, Hilary.
Yes. And for our listeners, we'd love to hear from you guys if you take on that 11-minute challenge this month. Mm-hmm. So with that, we will wrap up our Capricorn season for this month. We're going to have a great episode next week, like I said before, with our amazing guest. And we have some other wonderful things planned that are in alignment with what we talked about today, just continuing to illustrate these certain principles so that we can really get it down before we move to the Aquarius energy for next month.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.